I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about a different kind of pest to corn. They're probably the largest pest you might deal with, and maybe everybody doesn't have to deal with these, but some of us do. County agents are sometimes asked to make wildlife damage estimates to crops. This usually happens when producers and the DWR can't come to any resolution. Okay, in this situation, these three fields here, two small fields and a larger field, were being heavily damaged. It looked like it was primarily elk damage. The setting is this: these are near the Duchesne River in the Mighton area. There's a wildlife refuge that's in this area over here. And the description was that in August and early September, particularly the bulls would come in here, the bull elk would come in. They'd do their pre-rut activities of scraping and wallowing and pushing and fighting. But by mid-September, the bulls leave the fields to chase and breed the cows. The farmer had been working with DWR, who'd issued cow elk depredation permits, but felt they were ineffective in dealing with this problem. And he asked for help in quantifying the losses. It's kind of what it looks like close up. Besides areas where it looked like the elk were congregating and fighting, there were other areas where they just made trails through the corn. It looked like bulls probably were knocking over stalks, sometimes just knocking the tops out of the corn. Other places, you could definitely see where bites were taken out of ear corn when it was mostly developed. This looks like feeding probably in August or September. We found both elk and deer track. It was hard to distinguish between elk and deer feeding damage, but most of the knockdown corn appeared to be elk damage. We also found raccoon damage, but it was different looking. Raccoons tend to push over the stalks and shred the husks to get to the corn. But there was also places where the coon and elk damage occurred in the same place. Maybe the coons were taking advantage of corn that was knocked down by the elk. We estimated that the damage done by raccoons was about 10 to 15% of the total damage. We'd also find places where it looked like animals had taken a bite out of just taken the silk and perhaps the husk leaves. And we don't really know. It didn't determine how much that affected yield. In this slide, Troy's holding an ear from a stalk that had the top knocked out of it. The ear was still in good condition, but it was much smaller. Losing the top of the plant during grain fill reduced the size of the ear, and we estimated 20 to 40% yield loss just when the tops were knocked out of the corn at that stage. We got help from Andrew Wallace, who took these photos with a drone. He flew over the fields in September 27th, late September, flying at about 400 feet above the field, and was able to take these photos of the two smaller fields that included the whole field. And they were pretty good at showing the damaged areas. Most of the damage was near the edge of the field, but you could see trails and dispersed damage that occurred throughout the whole field. A couple weeks later, Mark Chenoweth flew over the fields with a different drone. This he flew over the large pivot. He took more than 700 photos in 19 passes. They all georeferenced, and each photo covered about 3 acres, and there was a lot of overlap. He used a computer program to stitch the photos together into a mosaic. The small version was a 180 megabyte photo of the large pivot, but something went wrong with the software and left holes in the middle of the field. In this slide, we can compare Andrew's photo of one of the small pivots, the one on the right, when it was still a little greener, with Mark's photo, the mosaic of the same field. And the damaged areas show up in both photos. If you can see up in here and down in here, these are major areas that show up in this photo also in the mosaic. But then there were these other areas. The stitching process seemed to produce some effects that look like could be interpreted as damage in this photo, but they didn't show up over here. After we looked at these two kinds of photos, the stitched photo or the original, the raw photo, we decided the best thing to do was use the raw photos. And here's an example of one of the small pivots. We divided the fields up into 36 quads that were about 1 acre in size, and then we rated the damage for each quad using a visual rating score. We took into consideration the notes we'd taken on the ground that are noted here by waypoints. These are points where we were walking on the ground and making notes, and then we compared that to what it looked like in the aerial photos. So this is what the rating score looked like. This was slight damage. We rated this as slight damage, maybe just a little bit of damage, more moderate damage, and then in this photo we considered that to be near the top end of the scale. And critical to doing this assessment was to have a comparison of the yield of the field. So we took a yield map, made a yield map of this field, of one of the small pivots. The numbers on this map refer to data points, not yield, but they used the combine yield monitor. In this 23 acre field, we had 166 yield points, and they ranged from 0 to 266 bushels the acre. The yield points per quad averaged 5, and there were up to 10 in some and only 1 in some of the small ones. Then we averaged the yield within the quad and compared that to the rating we'd given that quad for wildlife damage. The yields for the quads averaged from 32 bushels to 233 bushels. So we did a linear regression to estimate the relationship between the damage rating and yield. Each number in the damage rating resulted with this regression in a loss of 17 bushels in yield. This relationship allowed us to estimate the bushels lost and dollar value lost for each field. So in this table, we subtracted the estimated loss due to raccoons and came up with about $17,000 loss in the 3 fields combined. So the question is, one is how can this loss be used, and And we hope that it would be used, and feedback from the farmer indicated it was helpful in negotiating maybe more effective control measures with DWR. And we'd hope it also helped to make management decisions to minimize future losses. Somebody asked, did the DWR step up and pay $17,000 for the losses? I don't think that happened. The lessons we learned from doing this program and doing it this way was that the raw photos worked best for us rather than trying to make a mosaic, and that the yield map was critical to being able to estimate the total damage and put a dollar number to it.